She signed a contract to marry Chicago's most dangerous crime lord and had no idea she'd just signed her own death warrant. A waitress drowning in debt, a crime boss who needs a wife or loses everything. 1 year, one fake marriage, $5 million. No love, no exceptions. But in a world built on lies and gunfire, the most dangerous thing either of them ever did was start telling the truth. Drop your city in the comments below and let me know you're watching. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay with me until the very end. This one's going to burn. Well, the diner smelled like burnt coffee and old regret, and Delilah Rowan had long since stopped noticing either. She moved between tables with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had learned to disappear inside their own body, refilling cups nobody asked for, pocketing tips that barely covered the bus fare home, smiling at customers who looked through her like she was made of glass. The Friday night rush at Carver's on South Michigan Avenue was always the worst. Businessmen loosening their ties after the market closed, couples who still had somewhere to be, tourists who didn't know any better and wandered in off the street, expecting something that Carver's hadn't been since 1987. Delilah was 24 years old, and she moved like someone who was 38. She had dark circles pressed beneath her eyes that concealer couldn't fully kill. Her uniform, pale yellow, a faded Carver's crest on the breast pocket, was a size too big because the last waitress who quit had been broader in the shoulders, and they never ordered Delilah a replacement. Her hair was pulled back hard enough to give her a headache, which was fine, because the headache kept her awake, and being awake was the one thing she needed most right now. She was behind on rent by 6 weeks. Her phone had been shut off twice in the last month, both times reconnected by borrowing money from her coworker B, who was 53 and kept a photo of her grandkids taped to the cash register, and who Delilah had already paid back once and owed again and hated herself for it. And her brother Marcus had been missing for 19 days. She carried that last fact the way you carry something broken, carefully, with both hands, trying not to let it shift and cut you. Marcus was 21 and stupid and stubborn, and the only person on earth who had ever looked at Delilah like she was worth something without wanting anything in return. He'd gotten tangled up in sports betting 6 months ago. Small stuff at first. A few hundred here, a long shot parlay there. Then the losses stacked and the bets got bigger the way they always do. Because that's the math of desperation. You always think the next one is the one that brings you back. By the time Delilah found out, Marcus was down $40,000 to a man named Carver Lyle, who ran books out of a bar on the west side and had a reputation for creative debt collection. Marcus had disappeared 3 weeks after Delilah paid Lyle $3,000 she didn't have and promised him the rest within 60 days. The 60 days were running out. She was refilling the coffee of a man at table 4 who was reading something on his phone and hadn't looked up once when she heard the bell above the diner door and felt the shift in the room the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. It wasn't a sound exactly. It was more like a collective held breath. The couple by the window going quiet mid-sentence, the cook through the pass-through slowing down his movements, B freezing at the register with her hand still on the receipt printer. Delilah looked up. 3 men walked through the door. The first 2 were large in the way that suggested purpose rather than size. Broad-shouldered, wearing dark jackets that didn't quite conceal the bulk at their hips, moving with the slow deliberateness of men who never needed to rush because everything in a room rearranged itself around them automatically. They swept the interior in 3 seconds flat, eyes cataloging exits, confirming corners, and then stepped apart to flank the entrance. The third man came in between them and the room got smaller. He was tall, 6'2", maybe more, with dark hair that was slightly longer than the current fashion, but cut with enough precision to look intentional rather than neglected. He had the kind of face that photographers chase, strong jaw, deep-set dark eyes, a mouth that seemed permanently set somewhere between threat and indifference. He wore a charcoal suit that had been cut for his exact body, and he wore it the way a man wears something he's never once had to think about, which is the only way money actually looks like money. He scanned the diner once. His eyes stopped on Delilah. Not because she was standing in his path, not because she was the closest person. He looked at everyone in the room in sequence, and when he got to her, he simply stopped, which was something she would think about later, in the dark, trying to figure out whether it meant anything or whether she'd invented it. He moved to the counter and sat down. His security positioned themselves at a table near the window without being told. One of them pulled out a phone. Neither of them touched the menu. Delilah walked to the counter because that was her section, and because she had $11 in her checking account and couldn't afford to lose this shift by doing something stupid like pretending this wasn't happening. "Coffee?" she said. He looked at her without any visible reaction. Black. She poured it. Her hand was steady. She was proud of that. "You're Delilah Rowan," he said. Not a question. He said it the way you say something you verified before you showed up. She set the coffee pot down slowly. "Excuse me? I know about your brother." He picked up the cup and drank from it like the conversation was already settled. "I know about the debt. $47,000, current total with interest. Carver Lyle. I know you've been making payments you can't afford, and I know that in 19 more days when the deadline passes, Lyle is going to do something that isn't going to be reversible." Delilah stared at him. Her pulse was doing something strange. Not panic exactly. More like the feeling right before panic when your body is deciding whether to run or go very, very still. "Who are you?" she said. "Rafael DeLuca." He set the cup down, looked at her directly. "I have a proposition." She'd heard the name. Anyone who'd spent 5 years working the south side of Chicago had heard the name. DeLuca wasn't a rumor or a legend or a cautionary tale whispered by people who'd had too much to drink. DeLuca was a fact, the way certain weather systems are facts, present, measurable, and capable of ending things. He ran the DeLuca Syndicate, which meant he ran the port, 3 of the 5 major distribution networks, half the liquor licensing on the north side, and a private security firm that somehow always had city contracts renewed regardless of administration. He was 32 years old, and he had been running his father's operation since he was 26, when his father had died of what the papers called a heart attack, and what everyone else called something more complicated. "I don't," Delilah started. "I need a wife," Raphael said. "Immediately." The arrangement would be contractual, with clearly defined terms and a fixed duration of 1 year. At the end of that year, you receive $5 million and we part without complications. Your brother's debt is cleared within 48 hours of your agreement. You'd be moved to secure housing, provided a living allowance, and whatever your brother needs to get himself somewhere stable afterward is handled. Silence. Not the comfortable kind. Delilah felt the counter's edge pressing against her palm and realized she'd grabbed it. She made herself let go. "You're serious. I don't make social calls." He took another drink of coffee. "My organization is facing a challenge that requires a united front. Other families in the hierarchy, both local and out of state, are watching for signs of instability. I'm 32 and unmarried, which has created a perception problem I've ignored too long. Marrying within another syndicate family creates allegiances I don't want and complications I can't afford. I need someone outside that world entirely. And you picked a waitress." "I picked you specifically." His eyes didn't move from hers. "You're unconnected. You're intelligent enough to adapt. You have strong motivation to honor the terms. And you have no pre-existing allegiances to anyone in my world who might use you against me." "Or," Delilah said, her voice coming out flatter than she expected, "you thought a woman in my position would be easy to control." Something shifted in his expression. Not offense. She didn't think this man was built for offense. It was more like recalibration, the faint adjustment of someone encountering a variable they hadn't fully weighted. "That too," he said. She almost respected the honesty. She thought about Marcus. She thought about the debt collector named Richie, who had come to her apartment building 2 Tuesdays ago and left a manila envelope under her door containing a photograph of her brother's car and a handwritten note that just said, "Clock is ticking." She thought about the 6 weeks of back rent and the disconnected phone and the uniform that didn't fit and the way she had cried in the walk-in freezer at the back of this exact diner 3 days ago because there was nowhere else she could do it without someone seeing. "I want to see the contract," she said. Raphael reached into his jacket and placed a folded document on the counter. She stared at it. It was already printed. He'd come here expecting a yes, or at least expecting her to want to read it, which was either presumptuous or efficient, and she wasn't sure which one made her more uncomfortable. She picked it up, read it there at the counter, one hand resting on the coffee pot, because she wasn't going to sit down and she wasn't going to let him think this was a meeting on his terms, even if every other thing about it was. The document was thorough. 8 pages, dense with provisions. The core terms matched what he'd described. 1 year, $5 million payable upon completion, debt clearance within 48 hours. But the specifics went deep. Public appearances, mandatory attendance at events designated by Raphael with 2 weeks' notice. Private cohabitation. She would reside in his primary residence for the duration. Disclosure. She could not reveal the nature of the arrangement to any third party. Conduct. She was expected to present as his wife in all professional and social contexts. Fidelity clause. Both parties. The document was careful not to use the word obedience anywhere, which told her that whoever drafted it was smart enough to know she'd walk if they did. There was a line on page 6 that said, "The party of the second part acknowledges understanding that the scope of Rafael De Luca's professional activities extends beyond conventional business practice and accepts the associated security requirements." They'd written it in language that meant, you understand he runs organized crime and you agree not to pretend otherwise. She got to the last page. There was a line for her signature, and there was already a date filled in. Today's date. He'd come prepared to leave with this done. She looked up from the document. "My brother, you said 48 hours. 48 hours from the moment you sign. The debt is retired, not negotiated. It disappears. Lyle won't come near him again. And if something happens to Marcus while this arrangement is going on, I protect what's mine," Raphael said. It wasn't a reassurance. It was a statement of property, cold and practical, and somehow that made it more believable than a reassurance would have been. "And when the year is over?" "When the year is over, you walk out with $5 million, and I release you from any associated obligations. You don't owe me anything. I don't contact you. Whatever you do with the rest of your life is not my concern." Delilah was quiet for a long moment. The diner noise moved around her. Someone's fork scraping a plate. The pop of the coffee maker in the back. Bee punching something into the register. Normal sounds, the kind she'd been standing inside for 5 years without seeing anything on the other side of them. "I need a pen," she said. Raphael produced one from his jacket, set it on the counter. She signed her name on the line without letting her hand shake, and then she put the pen down and looked at him and said, "What happens now?" "Now you finish your shift," he said. "Or don't. I can settle your outstanding wages with the owner. A car will be at the curb in 2 hours to take you to the penthouse. Bring whatever you need for tonight. Someone will handle the rest tomorrow." He placed 3 $50 bills on the counter, which was approximately 400% more than his coffee cost. And he stood. "Mr. De Luca," Delilah said. He paused. "If you're lying to me about any of this, about Marcus, about the terms, about any of it," she stopped. Let the sentence find its own shape. "I want you to know that I've spent 5 years building a very detailed relationship with exactly what I have left to lose, and the answer is almost nothing. So whatever you think you know about my motivation to stay manageable, make sure you've accounted for that." He looked at her for 3 full seconds. "I know," he said. "That's why I chose you." Then he walked out, and the room exhaled, and Delilah stood there behind the counter with her signed name on 8 pages of legalese and the coffee pot going cold in her hand, and she told herself she had just made the only rational decision available to her. She almost believed it. The penthouse was on the 43rd floor of a building on North Lake Shore Drive, and it was so far outside anything Delilah had ever inhabited that her brain kept trying to file it under fiction rather than reality. She arrived in the back of a black Escalade with tinted windows, accompanied by one of the men from the diner, introduced to her only as Caruso, which might have been a first name or a last name, and she didn't ask. He didn't speak during the 20-minute ride. She didn't either. She spent the drive looking out the window at Chicago going past and thinking about what she would have done if she hadn't signed, and the answer kept coming back the same way, less. She would have had less. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer. There was no hallway, no other doors. It simply opened into space, and the space was enormous and hushed and smelled faintly of something clean and expensive that she couldn't identify. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Lake Michigan in the dark, the water black and light broken, the city's eastern edge glowing behind it like something barely contained. Marble floors, high ceilings, a living room that was larger than her entire apartment building's lobby. Art on the walls that she was fairly certain wasn't decorative in the way the art at Carver's Diner was decorative. Not prints, not reproductions, but actual paintings with actual brushwork and actual thickness you could see from across the room. A kitchen that had clearly been installed by someone with both enormous budget and deep conviction. A dining table that could seat 12. A woman named Helena, 30-something, precise, with the bearing of someone who ran things and never needed to raise her voice, met her in the foyer and offered to show her to her room. Delilah followed. They went down a long hallway that branched left toward what Helena described as Mr. DeLuca's private quarters and right toward the guest wing. Her room was the first door on the right wing, large, spare, furnished in dark wood and cream linens and with its own bathroom that had a standalone bathtub and products she'd only ever seen photographed in magazines. Helena told her that her personal items would be retrieved from her apartment the following morning by a team Raphael had arranged. She told her that a stylist would be present at 10 a.m. to discuss a wardrobe appropriate to her new public role. She told her that breakfast could be requested from the house kitchen at any hour, and that Delilah's dietary preferences would be noted and accommodated. She said it all in the same neutral, professional tone, and then she asked if there was anything Delilah needed immediately. Delilah looked around the room. She was wearing her waitress uniform because she hadn't had time to go home before the car arrived. She had her purse and a paper bag containing a change of clothes she'd grabbed from her locker at the diner and a phone charger. "Coffee," she said. "Just coffee." Helena nodded and disappeared. Delilah sat on the edge of the bed. It was the softest surface she'd sat on in months, and she noticed that about it the way you notice the absence of pain, with a dull, unguarded surprise. She took off her shoes and set them on the floor and looked at the window on the far wall, which showed her the lake and the dark sky, and a version of Chicago she had never had access to from the inside before. She thought, Marcus. 48 hours. She held on to that. She didn't see Raphael that night. She wasn't sure she expected to. She drank her coffee and took a shower that lasted too long because the water pressure was extraordinary, and she was very tired and there was no one there to see her indulging it. And she lay in the bed and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep well, which was fine because she hadn't slept well in 19 days, and one more night didn't change the math. In the morning, Helena brought her coffee again without being asked, which Delilah appreciated more than she was ready to say out loud, and at 9:15 she was standing in the penthouse kitchen in the oversized Marquette sweatshirt she slept in when a door opened at the far end of the hall and Raphael walked in. He was in motion before he was fully in the room, already on his phone, already talking, one hand pressing the device to his ear and the other adjusting the cuff of a white dress shirt that was still half open at the collar. He looked like someone who had already been awake for 3 hours and had done 3 hours worth of work, which, Delilah would learn, was exactly what the case was. He registered her presence without pausing his conversation. He moved to the coffee machine, poured from the already brewed pot, didn't use the machine, didn't wait for anything, and drank from the mug in one long pull while whoever was on the phone continued talking. Then he said, "That's unacceptable. Tell Russo to move the timeline up by 48 hours, or I'm pulling the contract entirely." A pause. "I don't care what his reasons are. I care about outcomes. Get it done." He pulled the phone from his ear and looked at Delilah. "Good morning," he said, as if that were a natural pivot. "Good morning," she said. He studied her for a second. "You didn't sleep." "I slept fine." He looked at her in a way that said he wasn't going to argue the point, but also wasn't going to pretend he believed her. "The stylist comes at 10. Helena will brief you on the schedule for the next 2 weeks. There's a charity event Friday evening, the Hartley Foundation Gala. It'll be your first public appearance as my wife, so it's important." "How important?" "There will be people at that event who are watching to see whether this is real." His tone was even, clean of anything emotional. "They're evaluating whether the DeLuca position is stable. The way you present, the way we interact in public, it's not theater for theater's sake. It's a message." "What message?" "That I'm not in a weak position." He paused. "And that whoever thought this arrangement would leave me exposed was wrong." Delilah wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "So I'm a statement. You're a partner in a business arrangement. The statement is an element of that." He set down his cup. "Is that a problem?" She thought about Marcus again, about the clock. "No," she said. It's not a problem. He nodded once, picked up his phone. Helena will find you for the briefing at noon. He was already moving back toward the hallway. The debt was wired to Lyle's accounts an hour ago. He said it without inflection, without ceremony, and then he was gone. Delilah stood in the kitchen with her coffee and let herself feel, just for a second, the strange physics of the morning. She had signed a contract last night. This morning, the number that had been keeping her awake for weeks had been made to disappear by a man who treated it the way she treated clearing tables, as an unremarkable task, completed between other unremarkable tasks, not worth remarking on. She told herself that was good, clean, transactional. She told herself not to think about the way he'd looked at her in the diner when she'd said she had almost nothing left to lose. The stylist's name was Laurent, and he arrived at 10 on the dot with 2 assistants and 12 garment bags and an expression of focused professional neutrality that Delilah respected because it meant he wasn't going to perform surprise about who she was or where she'd come from or the state of her existing wardrobe, which consisted largely of things she'd bought on clearance and things Marcus had given her at Christmases. He dressed her and undressed her and dressed her again across 4 hours. He spoke rarely, mostly in directions. Arms up, turn left, hold still. And he looked at her the way a craftsman looks at a problem, with concentration and without judgment. Twice he said something that sounded like approval. Once he said something that sounded like good bones, which she took as a compliment. At the end of it, she stood in front of a full-length mirror in a silk blouse and high-waisted trousers and heels she could actually walk in, and she looked at herself for a long time. She looked like someone who lived in this building. It should have felt like a costume. Maybe it did, but there was something underneath the costume that she noticed, something she hadn't expected. The person in the mirror had her own face and her own eyes, and those eyes looked back at her with something that wasn't quite defiance and wasn't quite fear. More like the face of someone who had made a decision and was going to follow it wherever it led. She didn't know whether to trust that look, but she kept it. Helena's briefing covered the next 14 days in 22 minutes with the precision of a military plan. The gala on Friday was primary. Between now and then, 2 afternoon appearances at public venues that Raphael frequented, designed to establish a visual record of the marriage for city press. A dinner on Wednesday with Raphael's lawyer and 2 board members of one of his above-ground companies, where Delilah would be present as his wife, and where her role was to be present, composed, and to say nothing that contradicted Raphael's account of how they had met, which was that they'd been introduced through a mutual contact 7 months ago, had maintained a private relationship, and had married quietly 3 weeks prior. 7 months, Delilah said. Yes. Helena had a tablet and she hadn't looked up from it. Do you need me to repeat any of that? No. What was I doing 7 months ago? Helena looked up. If someone asks where we met, what the story is, I need to know what I was doing 7 months ago according to the story. Because 7 months ago I was working doubles at Carver's, and I wasn't being introduced to anybody. Helena was quiet for a moment. Then, you were working at an events catering company. One of Raphael's business events. You spoke briefly. He followed up. Okay, Delilah said. What company? Helena told her. Delilah repeated it back. Then she asked for everything Helena could give her about Raphael's above-ground business profile. The companies, the board positions, the charitable involvement. Because if she was going to sit across a dinner table from his lawyer in 3 days, she was going to know what she was talking about. Helena looked at her for a moment with something that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite approval, but lived in the neighborhood of both. I'll have a file ready by 6, she said. Wednesday dinner was at a restaurant on the Gold Coast that didn't have prices on the menu. Delilah had read the file twice and committed everything she could. She'd practiced the catering story in the mirror until it stopped sounding like recitation. She'd gone through the cover story for their relationship. First conversation, second meeting, 3 months of quiet dating before he proposed, and smoothed it until it felt like memory rather than invention. Raphael sat across from her in the car on the way there and said nothing for 4 blocks. Then he said, "The lawyer's name is Preston Cross. He's been my family's attorney for 12 years. He's loyal, he knows the arrangement is a business transaction, and he will not ask you anything that isn't on the surface." And the board members? Graves and Callahan. Both know me primarily through the shipping company. Neither of them know anything about the other side of my business. With them, you play it straight, warm, quiet, supportive. Let me carry the conversation. What if they ask me something directly? Answer it honestly if you can. Deflect if you can't. He paused. You read the file Helena prepared. Yes. And? You have significant exposure on the Port Authority contract if the new City Council swing goes the way the polling suggests it will. And your stake in the Lakeview construction project is going to create a conflict with the Hartley Foundation's zoning position, which means Friday night is more complicated than it looks. Silence. Helena's file doesn't have any of that, he said. I read more than Helena's file. Another pause. Shorter this time. You did that in 2 days. I've been doing more than pouring coffee for 5 years, Delilah said. I just haven't had anything worth using it on. The restaurant went exactly as it needed to. Preston Cross was dry and professional and asked Delilah 2 questions. How she liked living on the lake and whether she'd been to Tuscany, both of which she answered without lying about anything that mattered. Graves and Callahan were focused on a shipping schedule and talked about it through most of the entree. Raphael was composed and certain, and said 2 things to Delilah at the table that were small and quiet and clearly performed for context, but that he delivered with enough precision that even she believed them for a moment. He put his hand briefly on hers when Cross said something that required a visible sign of unity, and his hand was warm and still, and she focused on the bread plate across the table and did not look at his face. In the car back, he said, You were good. I told you, she said. I know how to disappear in a room. Turns out I also know how to appear in one. They're not the same skill. No, she said, but the gap between them is smaller than you'd think. He was quiet for a long moment. The city moved past the windows. What did you study? He asked. It was the first question he'd asked about her that wasn't logistical. Business, she said. 2 years at UIC. Stopped when Marcus got into trouble the first time, and I needed to work more hours. I was going to go back. She paused. I kept saying I was going to go back. He didn't offer anything to that, but he didn't drop it like it hadn't happened either. He just sat with it, which was something. Malmont. Friday arrived with rain coming in off the lake, cold and horizontal, the kind of March weather that reminded Chicago it could still be January if it wanted. The gala was at 7. Laurent arrived at 4 with a garment bag containing something in deep burgundy that was the most expensive thing Delilah had ever been proximate to, and 2 women who did her hair and face with the same quiet focus he'd applied to the wardrobe. At 6:30, she walked out of her room and down the hall toward the elevator, and Raphael was already in the foyer in black tie, and he looked at her without saying anything for 2 full seconds. Will it work? She asked. Yes, he said. It will work. The Hartley Foundation Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House, and it was exactly what a room looked like when it was built for the specific purpose of communicating that the people inside it were not like other people. Crystal chandeliers. Dinner service for 300. Every surface saying, you are here because you matter, or because you have made yourself matter, which is functionally the same thing. They walked in together and Delilah felt it. The moment the room adjusted. Not all at once. It moved through the crowd in waves, the way a murmur moves, recognition first at the edges and then gathering toward the center. Raphael De Luca had come to the Hartley Gala before. Raphael De Luca had never brought anyone. The woman he'd brought was no one anyone recognized. That was the interesting part. She could feel them assessing her. Quick cuts of eye contact, the measured slide of attention that social circles like this have elevated to a refined art. She kept her posture easy and her face composed, and she stayed close to Raphael's side without crowding him, which was the balance she'd settled on, near enough to look genuine, not so near that it looked performed. A woman named Cecilia Hartley, the foundation's director and the architect of this evening, intercepted them within 3 minutes. She was 60 and elegant, and operated at a social frequency that most people in the room were actively trying to match. She welcomed Raphael warmly, and turned her attention to Delilah with the specific controlled smile of someone deciding how to categorize a new data point. And this must be your wife, she said. We were all so surprised to hear. Delightfully so. The word delightfully had 4 extra syllables in it. Delilah, Raphael said. My wife. Delilah shook Cecilia's hand and smiled and said the appropriate thing about what a beautiful event it was, and let the woman's eyes move over her and accepted the assessment without flinching. This was the part she'd prepared for. Not defensiveness, just presence. It got harder when the stylist, a woman named Petra, who had apparently been scheduled to dress Delilah before Raphael canceled the original arrangement and brought in Laurent, found her during the pre-dinner cocktail hour and made a point of doing it publicly. Petra was 45 and had cheekbones that suggested she had once been photographed for something and had never recovered from it, and she came at Delilah sideways, the way people come at you when they want to make a point without having it traced back to them later. "Interesting choice," Petra said, studying Delilah's dress with an expression of thoughtful wrongness. "Laurent, yes? He's very good for working with certain kinds of figure." The two women she was with both found something to look at across the room. Delilah held her champagne glass and kept her face neutral. "I just wonder sometimes if his choices are quite right for Raphael's particular milieu." She paused. "But then you'd know more about what Raphael wants, wouldn't you? Quite suddenly." Before Delilah could respond, before she had fully decided whether to respond at all, Raphael appeared at her shoulder, not from anywhere in particular. He was simply there, the way storms arrive in movies, right before something important happens, and he looked at Petra with a gaze that had exactly zero social performance in it. "Your entire department is dismissed," he said. Quiet, clean, to Petra. "Your contract with DeLuca Holdings is terminated effective Monday morning. If there's documentation you need, Preston Cross will handle it." Petra opened her mouth. Raphael turned to Delilah and said, "I'd like to find our table," as if the previous 10 seconds hadn't happened. Delilah walked with him through the crowd and did not look back, and felt something in her chest that she couldn't name immediately and eventually identified as the sensation of being defended, which was sufficiently unfamiliar that she needed a moment to categorize it. At the table, seated between Raphael and a city alderman whose name she'd read in the file, she said quietly, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "She was doing something small. I could have handled it. I'm aware." He unfolded his napkin. "I wanted to." She didn't answer that. She looked at the centerpiece, white roses, deeply unfashionable in that specific way that crosses back over into fashion, and let the evening move forward around her. Victor Moretti arrived late, as men who want to make a point about their own importance often do, and he did it with 6 people trailing behind him like a contrail. He was 53, gray at the temples, wide in the way that said he used to be fit, and had replaced the muscle with money and the money with authority, and he moved through the room with the specific ease of a man who believed that everything in his reach was already his. It was just a question of timing. He found Raphael during the pre-dinner mingle and came at him with the warmth of an old acquaintance who is planning to take something from you and has decided the most efficient approach is to be charming about it first. "Raphael," he said, "I heard you got married. Had to come see for myself." "Victor." Raphael's tone told Delilah nothing, which was, she was beginning to understand, its own form of information. Victor turned to her. His eyes moved over her in a way that was calibrated to be noticed by everyone nearby. "So this is the woman, Delilah." He said her name like he'd done research. "Quite the story. No one in the family, no connection to the business. A waitress." He smiled. Raphael always did have unconventional taste. The room near them went carefully quiet, in the way people go quiet when they want to appear not to be listening. "A woman who understands value," Raphael said, "is never a conventional choice." Victor's smile stayed exactly where it was. Still, one wonders what she brings to a man in your position, aside from the obvious. He glanced at Delilah once more, just long enough to make his meaning clear, and then back to Raphael with his hands folded in front of him, like a man who had just made a minor business observation. Raphael looked at Victor for a long moment, and then he said very quietly, "The next time you speak about my wife, I would suggest you consider what it would cost you. Not loud, not theatrical. The way someone says something when they don't need volume to make it hit." Victor's smile held, but his eyes changed. Something behind them went careful and recalibrated and put away. and he gave a small deferential nod that the people nearby would have interpreted as social grace and that Delilah read as acknowledgement of a line. Victor moved on. His people moved with him. The room exhaled by approximately 1 degree. Raphael turned to Delilah and offered his hand. I believe they're asking couples to take the floor. She looked at his extended hand. Then she took it. The orchestra was playing something slow and classical, and the floor was crowded enough that they were among rather than in front of, which helped. Raphael led without making a production of it, one hand at her waist, steady and certain, and she followed because she was a person who picked things up quickly, and this was a skill she'd taught herself from YouTube videos at 2 in the morning when she was 16 and had convinced herself she might one day need it. She was close enough to him now that she could feel the warmth radiating from his chest and smell something that was probably expensive cologne, and something underneath that was just him, which was a fact she noted and filed away carefully and did not take out again. You're tense, he said. I'm fine. Your left shoulder is about 6 millimeters higher than your right one. That's an extremely specific observation. I'm an extremely specific person. A beat. What are you thinking about? Victor Moretti, she said honestly, because it was easier to say that than what she was actually thinking about, which was the temperature of his hand. Forget Moretti tonight. Is that something you're able to do? No, he said, but I'm better at performing it. She almost laughed. Didn't quite. But the shape of a laugh moved through her chest, and he must have felt it because something in the quality of his grip changed, not tightening, just settling like a door finding its frame. You did well tonight, he said. We're not done yet. No, he agreed, but you did well. She looked past his shoulder at the chandelier light breaking across the ceiling and thought, this is the arrangement. This is what it is. Performance and transaction and $5 million in 1 year. And then she thought, quietly, and without wanting to, this is also the first time in a long time that someone has been paying attention to my left shoulder. She kept that thought brief, tucked it away. The song ended, they separated by a half step and stood in the space of the ending. The room moved around them. His hand was still at the edge of her waist, not quite withdrawn yet, and she didn't move away from it yet either, and it was perhaps 3 seconds, which is not a long time by any objective measure. 3 seconds can be long enough to understand that something is happening. 3 seconds can be enough to know that the contract is not going to cover everything. The Escalade pulled into the private garage beneath the building at 11:43. The rain had gotten worse. The garage was warm and fluorescent, and after the ballroom it felt brutally small. Raphael held the car door and she got out, and they walked toward the elevator in the particular silence of 2 people who have spent a charged evening managing their proximity and are now suddenly in close quarters with no audience. She pressed the button. The elevator arrived. They got in. She was looking at the floor numbers ascending. He was standing with his arms at his sides, which was not his usual posture. Usually he held some tension in them, the readiness of a man who never fully powers down. But right now they were just loose and open at his sides, and something about that made her look at him. He was already looking at her. She looked at the floor numbers. The elevator opened. They walked down the hall. She stopped at her door. He stopped in the hall, 4 feet away, which was further than he needed to stop. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She pushed the door open, stepped inside, and then, from habit or from something else, she turned back. He was still standing there, not waiting for anything, just standing, looking at her with an expression that she couldn't read and that she had the strong instinct was being carefully managed. "Raphael," she said. "Don't," he said, very quietly. She didn't know what she'd been going to say. She found standing there that she didn't have a clean argument for her own intentions. She closed the door. She stood on the other side of it in the dark for a moment, her back against the wood, and took a long, steadying breath and told herself that tomorrow would be cleaner than tonight. Tomorrow would be daylight and logistics and the clear business of the arrangement, and whatever the gala had built between them under the cover of chandelier light and champagne and the necessary performance of closeness. Tomorrow it would be smaller, more manageable. She told herself that. She was already asleep when the sound reached her, a sharp, enormous crack, the implosion of glass, and then the penthouse came apart around her, and the night turned into chaos, and the darkness she'd been standing in stopped being metaphor and became something immediate and real and terrifying. The window at the end of the hall exploded inward. Delilah was already moving. Instinct, pure animal. When the door to her room blew open and Raphael was there in the gap, one hand grabbing her arm, pulling her down and against the wall in a motion so fast and certain it left no room for hesitation. A second crack. The mirror at the end of the hall shattered and fell. And Raphael was over her, his body blocking her body, his shoulder hard against the wall as he pressed her down and behind him, and in the terrible loud darkness of the ruined penthouse, Delilah realized two things in rapid and unwanted succession. That someone had just tried to kill them, and that the man covering her with his body was shaking, not with fear, but with something she would have called fury, if fury were cold and controlled and very, very focused. He turned his head and looked at her in the dark. His face was 2 inches from hers. There was a cut above his eyebrow from the glass, and blood was moving down his temple, and he looked at her with those dark eyes and said very quietly, "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. "Good." He pressed closer for a second. Not tenderly, not with feeling, just with the urgent mechanics of protection, and said against her ear, barely a sound, "Stay behind me. We are getting out of this building right now." And that was the moment Delilah understood that she had walked into something she had not fully calculated. Not the danger. She'd known danger was in the contract, had felt it implied in every careful page, but the specific weight of this man's body over hers in the broken dark. The way he said, "Are you hurt?" before anything else. The blood on his face and the complete unshaking steadiness of his voice. That was the part she hadn't calculated. That was the part that was going to cost her something. She just didn't know yet what. The safe house was a brownstone on the northwest side that had no listed address and whose windows had been bricked over from the inside sometime in the last decade. Delilah knew this because when they arrived, after 40 minutes in the back of an armored vehicle with no windows, Raphael on his phone for 37 of those minutes, not speaking to her, not looking at her, his voice low and even and completely uninflected in the way of someone who has had to conduct serious business during serious situations often enough that the two no longer interfere with each other. The first thing she did when they brought her inside was look for a window and find only plaster and painted brick where windows should have been. There were 6 men already in the house when they arrived, armed, positioned, clearly not surprised to see them, which meant this place had been on a contingency list and someone had made a call while Delilah was still crouched in the rubble of the penthouse hallway with Raphael's shoulder pressed against the wall above her head. She was put in a room on the 2nd floor. It had a cot, a lamp, a table, and a door that was not locked but that she understood without being told she was not supposed to walk out of without reason. She sat on the cot in her burgundy gala dress with her heels still on because she hadn't had the chance to take them off. And she looked at the lamp, and she did something she hadn't given herself permission to do in a very long time. She let herself feel how frightened she was. Not performance, not processing, just the raw physical fact of it, moving through her chest in slow waves, and she breathed through it the way you breathe through pain, steadily, telling her body that it was already over. The worst of it was already over. She didn't know yet whether that was true. Raphael came to the room 40 minutes later. He'd changed. Someone in the house had provided him with a dark shirt and trousers that fit reasonably well, and someone had cleaned the cut above his eyebrow, which was now closed with 2 thin strips of medical tape. He looked like a man who had been shot at and had decided not to let it mean anything yet. He sat in the single chair across from the cot and looked at her. "We're going to be here through the weekend," he said. "Possibly longer. My team is working on identifying the source of the shot." "Shots," she said. "There were 2. 2 confirmed positions," he said. "Yes." "From the building across the street?" He paused, just briefly. "You were paying attention." "I was frightened," she said. "Frightened people pay attention. Where was the 2nd position?" "We don't know yet." She looked at him. "Victor Moretti. He's a possibility." "He's not just a possibility." She kept her voice level. "He was at that gala tonight with 6 people, and he looked at you like he was measuring something. He wasn't being careful about hiding it." "Victor Moretti doesn't hide things as a matter of principle," Raphael said. "It's a power display. He wants me to know he's watching." "Well, now he's shot at us." "Allegedly." "Raphael." He looked at her directly. There was something locked in his face that she was beginning to learn to read. Not calm, not at all, but control layered over something that ran hot underneath, so carefully managed that most people would miss it entirely. She was starting to catch the edges of it. "What do you need?" he asked. "I need you to tell me what's actually happening, not the managed version, not what you'd tell Preston Cross or one of your board members." She put her heels on the floor beside the cot and pressed her feet flat against the cold wood. "You brought me into this arrangement. You told me there were security requirements. This is them. I deserve to know what I'm inside of." A long pause. "Victor Moretti controls the Southside distribution network and 3 port channels that border mine," Raphael said finally. "For 3 years we've maintained a territorial agreement that neither of us has been entirely comfortable with. 6 weeks ago, one of his shipments was intercepted by federal agents at a port facility that technically falls under my oversight. Did you give him up?" "No." "Does he believe that?" Raphael's jaw shifted. "He believes whatever is most convenient for his current strategic position." "So he thinks you did?" "He wants a reason," Raphael said. "Whether he believes it or not is secondary. The important thing is that it gives him justification in front of the High Council for moving against me. If I'm unstable, somewhat unmarried, politically exposed, potentially cooperating with federal investigators, the other families will step back and let him take territory. And if you're married," Delilah said slowly, "if you look settled and solid and like you have something to protect, the calculus changes." "Yes." "Which means me showing up tonight didn't just fix your image problem." She looked at him. "It made me a target." He didn't look away. "Yes." The word landed cleanly. She'd expected him to soften it. The fact that he didn't, that he gave it to her straight, without apology or cushioning, did something complicated to her anger. "You knew this was a possibility when you came to the diner," she said. "I knew there were risks. I assessed them against the probability that the arrangement would stabilize things quickly enough to remove the threat before it materialized." He paused. "I was wrong about the timeline." "You were wrong." She said it back to him, not an accusation, just the sound of the words. "You're telling me you made a miscalculation that put a sniper's bullet through your penthouse window?" "Yes." "And now I'm in a room with no windows in a house I don't know the address of." "Yes," she breathed. "Okay," she said. He frowned. It was the smallest frown she'd seen on a man. "Okay." "I mean, it's not okay," she said. "I mean, I'm processing it, and I'm angry, and I'm going to stay angry about it for a while. But I'm not going to fall apart in front of you, and I'm not going to demand something that the situation can't currently provide. So, what do I actually need to know to stay safe and useful while we're here?" He was quiet for a moment in a way that felt deliberate, like he was deciding how much to give her and landing on more than he'd originally planned. "Don't go near the front of the building," he said. "There's a kitchen in the back. Eat whatever's there. My men know you're not to be touched or questioned. If something happens and I'm not in the building, Caruso is your point of contact." "What counts as something happening?" "If you hear gunfire," he said. "In a house with no windows," she said. "There are monitors." He stood. "I know this isn't what you signed on for." "No," she agreed, "but I signed on for it anyway." She looked up at him. In the lamplight, the taped cut above his eye made him look temporarily mortal in a way that the rest of him worked very hard to obscure. "Is your head okay?" He touched the tape briefly, like he'd forgotten it was there. "Glass cut. It's fine." "You moved very fast," she said. "In the hallway, when the window went. Training." "You moved to me first," she said. "Before you moved to cover. You came to my room first." He looked at her with something in his eyes that she couldn't name and that he extinguished before she could study it properly. "You're the liability I can't afford to lose," he said. She held his gaze. "Is that what that was?" He didn't answer. He walked to the door. "Raphael," she said. He stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for the hallway." His hand was on the door frame. She could see the tension in it from across the room. Then he said, "Get some sleep," and left. And the door stayed open behind him, which felt like a deliberate message of some kind. She didn't sleep. She lay on the cot in the dark and thought about all of it. Marcus and the money and the contract and the penthouse, and the gala, and Victor Moretti's specific smile, and the weight of Raphael's shoulder in the broken dark of the hallway. And she thought about it all the way she thought through problems at the diner, laying pieces out on a flat surface and looking at them without feeling until the shape of them became clearer. The shape of this one was, she was inside something that had begun before she arrived and would continue beyond her unless something stopped it, and she had signed a document that had no clause for sniper fire from a rival crime syndicate, but that had her name on it regardless. The shape of this one was also, she had not. When she was in the hallway in the dark with the glass falling and the world contracting to the space of one man's body between her and the bullet, felt only fear. She'd felt something else. Something worse, probably, in the long run. She turned her face toward the wall and didn't name it. Morning arrived without sunlight because there were no windows, but someone in the house made coffee, and the smell of it moved up through the floor, and that was how she knew. She found the kitchen at the back of the house and poured herself a mug and sat at a small table and was working through it when Caruso came in and stood near the door the way men who are paid to watch things stand near doors. "You need anything?" he asked. "Information," she said. "Can't help with that." "Did they identify the shooter?" "Ms. Rowan. Mrs. DeLuca," she said. It came out automatically, and she heard herself say it and sat with the strange weight of it. "Did they identify the shooter?" Caruso looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man doing a rapid cost-benefit analysis. "Not yet," he said. "They're working on it." "How many people knew we were at the gala last night?" "It was a public event. Guest list was 300 plus. Who knew we'd be back at the penthouse before midnight, specifically?" Caruso's expression shifted slightly. "That's a good question." "I know," she said. "Who's answering it?" "Mr. DeLuca is." "When does he sleep?" "I'll let him know you asked," Caruso said, which was not an answer, and he left with his coffee and left her with the question she'd already been turning over since 3 in the morning. Not just who had known they were at the gala, but who had known exactly when they'd leave. Boo! Raphael was in what the house used as a command room, a back parlor with 2 folding tables pushed together, 4 monitors, and 3 men she didn't recognize who had the specific posture of people being paid to think rather than shoot. He was standing with his arms crossed, looking at something on the closest monitor, and when she came through the door he didn't look up, but the quality of his stillness changed in a way she was learning to read as "I know you're there." "I need to ask you something," she said. "Later," he said. "It's about the timing." He looked up. "The shooter knew when we'd be back," she said. "Not just that we were at the gala. The first shot came within 4 minutes of us entering the building. That's a narrow window. That means someone on a short list knew our departure time." The 3 men at the tables had gone carefully still. Raphael looked at her for a long moment. Then he said to the men, "Give us the room." They filed out without comment. The door closed. "The car service," he said. "The driver filed a route confirmation at 10:45, standard protocol." "Who receives the confirmation?" "My security coordinator, 2 other senior staff," he paused, "and the building's private dispatch." "Which is staffed by who?" "Building security. 6 employees on rotation." He said it, and then he stopped, and she could see him arriving somewhere he didn't want to go. "The building dispatch logs all vehicle arrivals and departures for safety protocols." "So someone in that chain told someone where you'd be and when," she said, "either for money or under pressure." "Or both," he said. She looked at him. "This is your leak." "Yes." His voice was even, but his jaw was tight, and she could see the specific kind of anger that comes not from surprise, but from the confirmation of something you'd already suspected and had been hoping you were wrong about. "I know." "What are you going to do about it?" "What I always do," he said. She almost didn't ask. Then, "And what is that?" He looked at her directly. "Find out who. Make sure it doesn't happen again." The sentence had enough space in it for her to understand what "doesn't happen again" meant, without him needing to spell it out. And she made herself hold his gaze and not flinch from what she understood, because she had signed a contract with this man, and flinching from what he was now, 3 days in, was a luxury she hadn't bought herself. "Okay," she said. "You keep saying that." "Keeps being the right word." He studied her. "Most people would be asking to get out of the arrangement by now." I'm not most people. She wrapped both hands around her mug. And where would I go? Back to Carver's? Back to my 6 weeks overdue rent and my non-functional phone and waiting for Richie to leave another envelope under my door? She shook her head. I signed the contract. The contract is the deal I have. I work with what I have. Something moved across his face. Too fast to track completely, but she caught the edge of it. Something that was not quite admiration and not quite regret, and lived somewhere uncomfortably close to both. There's another problem, he said. Tell me. The High Council has requested a meeting, 3 days. What kind of meeting? The kind where they decide whether my position is tenable. He moved to the table and picked up something, a phone, a tablet, she couldn't see clearly, and set it down again. A man who needed to do something with his hands and wouldn't allow himself anything obvious. If they determine the instability in my territory is too great, they have the authority to redistribute assets under mediated transition. Which means Moretti gets what he wants without needing to shoot anyone else, essentially. So the meeting is 3 days from now, and you need to walk in there looking like someone who is very much not falling apart. Yes. And your penthouse is a crime scene, and you're in a safe house, and there's a leak in your security chain, and someone just tried to kill us. Also, yes, she breathed. What do they need to see in that meeting? Unity, he said. Stability. A man who is not rattled. Are you rattled? He looked at her. No. Good, she said. Then we prep. What do you know about the council members and where they stand on the current territorial arrangement? He was quiet for a moment that felt like it had some weight to it. Then, sit down, he said. This is going to take a while. She sat down. Us. They worked for 6 hours. It was not the kind of work she was used to. No tables to clear, no orders to take. It was the kind of work she was good at and hadn't had a vehicle for in years. Listening to things, breaking them apart, finding the structural weaknesses in arguments, flagging the places where the logic didn't hold. Raphael talked through the council members one by one, 5 of them, each with their own territory, their own allegiances, their own read on the DeLuca-Moretti conflict. And Delilah asked questions that sometimes annoyed him and sometimes made him stop and think, and once made him look at her with a sharpness that felt less like assessment and more like recognition. By early afternoon, they had a working approach for the meeting. By mid-afternoon, they had identified the most likely source of the security leak. A dispatcher named Holt, who had been on duty the previous night and who had financial irregularities that 2 of Raphael's men had now confirmed through channels she was deliberately not asking too many questions about. By the time someone brought food through, sandwiches, nothing ceremonial, they had been sitting across a folding table from each other for long enough that the dynamic had shifted into something that felt less like a contract arrangement and more like 2 people solving a shared problem, which was perhaps the most unsettling development of the entire 24 hours. She realized it when he passed her a bottle of water without looking up from what he was reading, automatic and unbothered, like a reflex, like something you did for someone you'd been sitting across a table from for months. She took the water. She didn't say anything about it, but she noticed. Late afternoon, when the tension of the day had settled into the specific exhaustion of sustained alertness, he said, "You studied Marcus's situation before you came to me. When I made the offer at the diner, you didn't panic. You read the contract. Yes, most people panic. I've been panicking for weeks," she said. "I ran out." He almost smiled. She saw it, the movement at the corner of his mouth that didn't quite arrive. "Where did you learn to read a contract like that?" "Business courses and necessity." She set down her water. "I managed the finances at a nonprofit for 8 months before they defunded the program. Vendor contracts, employment agreements, small stuff. But the structure's the same." "You didn't mention that." "You didn't ask about my resume," she said. "You ran a background check." "I ran a security check," he said. "It's different." "Not that different." He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "Not that different." There was a quiet between them. Not uncomfortable exactly, but charged in the way that quiet between 2 people gets charged when neither of them is performing anything and both of them know it. She was the one who broke it. "What was your father like?" The shift was immediate and visible, not explosive, but structural, the way a building shifts when something below it settles. He picked up his coffee mug and set it down again. "Why?" he said. You've been running his organization for 6 years. I'm trying to understand what you inherited. An empire with debts, he said. Flat. Then after a pause, he was exact. Not cruel, people confuse those things. He understood what he'd built and he held it together through precision. Every decision, every relationship, every alliance was measured. He paused. He also trusted the wrong person for 11 years, and that's what killed him. Not a rival, not a federal investigation, someone inside. Like your current leak, she said. Yes. His voice didn't change, but the word came out with more weight than the rest. Is that why you chose someone outside? She said carefully. For the marriage. Not because I was easy to manage or unconnected, but because inside had already cost you something. He looked at her for a long time. You're doing it again, he said. What? Seeing things I didn't invite you to see. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. He said it quietly. It's useful. And then quieter still. It's also... He stopped. She waited. He didn't finish the sentence. He stood up and said they needed to go over the council approach one more time before the evening briefing, and she let the moment close over itself and followed him back to the maps and the monitors and the work, because the work was the thing she understood, and the unfinished sentence was not something she could afford to pull on right now. But she felt it there, like a thread left loose, and she was honest enough with herself to admit that part of her wanted very badly to follow it. The call came at 11:17 that night. Delilah was sitting on the cot in her room, the lamp on, reading through notes she'd made on the council meeting approach, when she heard voices in the hallway. Raphael's, Caruso's. A third one she didn't know, all low and rapid. She heard the specific change in Raphael's voice that she now associated with information landing badly, and then the door to her room opened without a knock. Raphael stood in the doorway. He looked at her with his face and the careful control she'd come to recognize as his version of crisis management. What? She said. We found the leak, he said. Holt, you told me. Holt was the conduit, he said. We found the source. A pause. The kind that precedes something that reorders the room. The source is someone who has access to your personal information, prearrangement information. She went very still. Who? She said. Someone who knew about your brother's debt before I did. Someone who gave Moretti's people the leveraged information about Marcus, the debt amount, Lyle's name, the timeline, which is how Victor knew the arrangement was a pressure point before we were even seen publicly. Her chest was doing something wrong. Who? She said again. We're still confirming, he said, but the information came from someone who had access to you before last Thursday, which is a very short list. She thought about it. She went through the list in her head the way you go through a drawer looking for something you've lost. Fast at first and then slower when you realize it's not where it should be. B.A. from the diner. Her landlord. The debt collector, Richie, but Richie worked for Lyle and Lyle was already paid off. The nonprofit she'd worked at. Her UIC records. Marcus's friends, the ones she'd contacted when he disappeared. The ones she'd told about the debt because she'd needed to ask if anyone had seen him. The ones she'd told. Who confirmed it? She said. Her voice came out very even, which she recognized as her version of the same control Raphael used, and she was aware in some distant part of herself that they had this in common. He said a name. It was a name she knew. It was the name of someone Marcus had called his best friend for 4 years. Someone who had sat in Delilah's kitchen, eating leftover pasta and watching basketball, and borrowing $20 and never quite paying it back. Someone she had called 3 weeks ago and cried to about her brother being missing and told everything she'd been carrying because she had been desperate enough to trust someone with it and had chosen the wrong. The name was Danny Cruz. Delilah sat with it for 3 seconds before she said anything. 3 seconds during which the lamp on the table seemed to get brighter and then too bright and then wrong. The way light gets wrong when your nervous system is trying to process something that doesn't fit the shape of the world you thought you were living in. Danny Cruz had been Marcus's roommate for 2 years, had been at every birthday, every bad night, every Tuesday that turned into a long conversation about nothing, had texted Delilah memes at midnight and called her D and borrowed her car twice and returned it with a full tank both times, which was the kind of small, reliable thing that made you trust someone without ever consciously deciding to. She had called Danny 17 days ago, had sat on her kitchen floor with her back against the refrigerator and told him everything. The debt amount, Lyle's name, the 60-day clock, the photo of Marcus's car. She had cried. She had asked if he'd heard from Marcus, if Marcus had said anything, if there was anything Danny knew that could help her find him. Danny had said he didn't know anything. Danny had said he was worried too. Danny had said, "Dee, I'm so sorry. I'll ask around. You're not alone in this." She looked at Raphael in the doorway. "You're sure?" "The financial trail is confirmed," he said. "Moretti's people paid 4 wire transfers to an account connected to a shell company. The shell company's owner of record is a name that doesn't exist, but the account activity traces to a device registered at an address that used to be your brother's apartment. Danny moved in after Marcus disappeared," she said. Her voice sounded like it was coming from slightly outside her body. "Yes." "He told Moretti about the debt, about the arrangement. He gave Moretti's people enough to know that you were a pressure point before the marriage was public. They used Marcus as the angle." Raphael paused. "We believe Moretti's people reached out to Danny before Marcus disappeared. We believe Danny may know where Marcus is." The last sentence landed differently than the others. She stood up. Her legs were steady, which surprised her. She thought they might not be. "Say that again." "We believe Danny Cruz has been in contact with Victor Moretti's organization for at least 6 weeks. We believe he may have information about your brother's current location." She crossed the room in 4 steps and pushed past Raphael into the hallway and walked to the command room because she needed to be moving, and standing still was not something her body was going to allow her right now. The command room was still lit, 2 of Raphael's men at the monitors. She stood at the table and looked at the information spread across it. Printed call logs, a map of the city with locations marked, a photograph she hadn't seen before. And she picked up the photograph. It was Danny, taken from a distance, grainy, through what looked like a restaurant window. He was sitting across from a man she didn't recognize, late 40s, heavy, with the specific bearing of someone who delivered other people's decisions rather than making his own. There was a folder on the table between them. The timestamp in the corner said 3 weeks ago, 4 days after Marcus disappeared. Raphael had come in behind her. She could feel him in the room without looking. "You had him watched," she said, "before you came to me." "I had everyone in your immediate circle confirmed," he said. "Standard protocol before approaching someone for an arrangement like this." "You knew about Danny before you sat down at that counter?" A pause. "I knew he had contact with Moretti's network. I didn't know the depth of it." She set the photograph down carefully. "Did you know my brother was in more danger than you told me?" "I knew Marcus was a variable," Raphael said. "I didn't know Moretti had a direct line to his situation through someone you trusted." She turned around. He was standing near the door, arms loose at his sides, watching her with that managed expression that she now knew had real fire behind it, and that she was too exhausted and too angry to navigate diplomatically. "A variable," she said. "Delilah, you used the word variable to describe my brother." "I'm telling you what I knew and when I knew it, because you asked me for honesty," he said. His voice didn't rise, but it got denser, like something compressing. "I could give you a softer version. I'm choosing not to." She breathed, once, twice. "Where's Danny now?" she said. "We're locating him." "How long?" "A few hours, maybe less. I want to be there when you find him." "That's not—" "I want to be there," she said again. Not louder, just more completely certain. "He used me. He used what I told him in confidence to put my brother in the middle of a war between you and Victor Moretti. I want to look at him when he explains that." Raphael studied her for a long moment. She could see him calculating. Not whether she could handle it, she thought, but whether her presence would be tactically useful or tactically problematic, because that was how he processed everything, through the lens of what worked. "You don't interfere with the questioning," he said. "Agreed." "You stay back unless I bring you in." "Agreed. And if what he tells us requires immediate action, you follow my instruction without argument about the nature of that action." She held his gaze. "I know what you are, Raphael. I signed the contract knowing what you are." "Yes." He gave a single nod and turned to one of his men and said, "Get Caruso. Tell him we move when the location is confirmed." They found Danny Cruz at 2:40 in the morning in the apartment of a woman named Gretchen, who lived in Pilsen, and who Raphael's men cleared from the building with a speed and discretion that suggested they had done this many times before. Danny was in the kitchen eating cereal at the counter in his socks and a Bears hoodie, and when the door came open and 4 men walked through it, he dropped the bowl and it broke on the tile. And he stood there with milk on his ankle and his face doing the rapid, terrible mathematics of a man who has just understood that the thing he thought he'd managed has found him instead. Delilah came in after Caruso. Danny saw her, and something in his face did something she would remember for a long time. Not guilt exactly, though that was part of it. More like the specific shame of someone who has been caught in an act that they had managed to convince themselves was justified while they were doing it, and who cannot maintain that justification when the person they've wronged is standing 3 feet away in a safe house sweatshirt at 3 in the morning. "D," he said. "Sit down, Danny," she said. He sat down. Not because the men in the room made him, because she said it. Raphael ran the questioning. He sat across from Danny at the small kitchen table, and he did it the way Delilah imagined he did everything, methodically, with total economy of movement, his voice completely level and completely relentless. He didn't threaten explicitly. He didn't need to. The threat lived in the quality of his attention, in the way he held eye contact without blinking, in the specific patience of a man who has nowhere else to be and unlimited capacity to wait. Danny lasted 9 minutes before he talked. He'd been approached by a man named Soto, one of Moretti's mid-level people, 8 weeks ago. Moretti's organization had been watching Marcus's betting activity for months, had identified the debt, had decided that the Rowan family dynamic was useful material. They'd approached Danny with a specific proposition: keep them informed about Delilah's situation, flag anything that changed, confirm whether she reached out to anyone outside normal channels. They were going to help Marcus, Danny said. His voice had the fractured quality of someone who has been telling themselves a story long enough to almost believe it. Soto said if I cooperated, they'd clear Marcus's debt, get him somewhere safe. He's my best friend, man. You thought Moretti's people were going to do something charitable, Raphael said. Danny's mouth closed. They told you what you needed to hear, Raphael said, and you told them what they needed to know, which included the information that Delilah gave you in confidence 3 weeks ago, the debt amount, the timeline, my name. I didn't know what they were going to do with it. Where is Marcus? Delilah said. Her voice came out flat and cold, and she hadn't planned the specific temperature of it, but there it was, and Danny looked at her like she'd hit him. D, I swear, I didn't know they were going to... Where is he, Danny? I don't know exactly. You have been in contact with Moretti's people for 8 weeks, she said. My brother has been missing for 19 days. You sat at that table and ate cereal tonight while you knew something about where he is, and I need you to tell me what that something is right now. Something in Danny's face cracked. Not dramatically, no movie breakdown, no hands over the face. Just a small, visible fracturing, like a windshield absorbing pressure. Soto told me Marcus was being held somewhere safe, he said. He said they weren't going to hurt him. They just needed him as a... He used the word insurance. Insurance against what? Against you. Danny looked at the table. In case you needed more motivation, to cooperate with whatever they were going to ask you to do. The kitchen went very quiet. Delilah stood there with her hands at her sides, and she thought about Marcus at 21 years old and stubborn and stupid, and hers, sitting in a room somewhere in this city, while the people holding him told themselves he was just insurance, just a manageable variable, just leverage, and she felt the anger move through her in a long, clean wave that started cold and ended somewhere past heat. Where? She said. Where does Soto operate? I don't know the address, I swear. They always came to me. But Soto contacted you directly. On a phone. A burner. He gave it to me. Where is it? Danny reached into the pocket of his hoodie and put the phone on the table. Raphael picked it up without touching the screen and handed it to Caruso with 2 words, full extraction. Then he looked at Danny for a long moment and said, You're going to stay here. You're not going to make a call or send a message or open a window. My men are going to be in this apartment until further notice. If you cooperate fully with everything we need from this point forward, what happens to you after this is over will reflect that cooperation. Do you understand? Danny nodded. He looked at Delilah once more. She didn't give him anything. She turned and walked out of the kitchen and stood in the hallway of Gretchen's apartment in Pilsen and put her back against the wall and pressed her palms flat against the plaster and breathed. Raphael came out 2 minutes later. He stood in front of her and he didn't say, "Are you okay?" because she was clearly not okay. And she was learning, a precise enough radar for the gap between true and performative that he didn't waste words in it. "We'll find him," he said. "You don't know that." "No," he said. "But the phone has 2 weeks of contact history with Soto's number. My tech team will have a location on that number within the hour." She pressed her palms harder against the wall. "If they've heard him, then we deal with that when we know it," he said. "Right now we work with what we have." She looked at him. His face in the hallway's dim light was exactly what it always was. Controlled, certain, specific. And she thought, this man has probably stood in a lot of hallways like this one, at a lot of 3 in the mornings, in the aftermath of a lot of things that were not supposed to go this way. And he has never once let the weight of that show in his face. And she could not tell whether that was strength or damage or both of those things wearing each other's clothes. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said back. And this time it didn't sound clinical. It sounded like agreement. The ride back to the safe house was quiet until it wasn't. Caruso was in the front. Raphael was beside her in the back, and he was on his phone again, low and rapid, and she sat looking at the city outside the window and thought about the High Council meeting in 2 days, and thought about Victor Moretti, and thought about a burner phone with 2 weeks of contact history and a brother who was somewhere in this city being called insurance. Then the phone in Raphael's hand buzzed differently. Not a call, a notification. And he looked at it and went very still. She turned from the window. His face had done something new. The control was still there, but it had gotten tight in a way she hadn't seen before. Tight in the way something gets right before it gives. And he was reading something on the screen with the absolute concentration of a man receiving information he had been partly dreading. "Raphael," she said. He turned the phone and showed her the screen. It was a photograph. The resolution was poor, the lighting bad. A concrete room, industrial, one bare bulb. A man was seated in a metal chair with his wrists zip-tied behind him and his head down and his face turned partially away from the camera. Even at poor resolution, even with the head turned, even after 19 days of not seeing him, Delilah knew the line of that jaw and the set of those shoulders as well as she knew her own name. Marcus. Below the photograph, a message in plain text. "Tell your wife she has 48 hours. The ledger. Alone. Or the insurance policy expires." She stared at the screen. The city moved past the windows. Caruso drove. The ledger. Moretti wanted Raphael's financial ledger, the one Helena had mentioned obliquely in the briefing documents, the one that contained the movement records of every fund, every contract, every above and below ground financial operation of the DeLuca Syndicate for the past 6 years. The document that, in the wrong hands, was not just leverage but demolition. It would give Moretti everything he needed to present to the High Council, to federal investigators, to anyone he chose, a complete structural map of Raphael's empire, handed over willingly. 48 hours. Alone. She was still holding the phone when Raphael took it gently from her hand. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't what?" "Don't calculate how to do it without telling me." She looked at him sharply. "I can see it," he said. Not accusing, just factual. "You're looking at that photograph and you're thinking, what if I just get the ledger and go? What if that's the fastest path to bringing him home?" He paused. "It's not. It's the path Moretti wants because it ends with Marcus still as leverage and me with nothing left to stand on." "I know that," she said, mostly honestly. "Do you?" "I know it," she said. "It doesn't make the photograph easier to look at." He held her gaze for a long moment, and then he put the phone away and looked out his own window, and she saw his jaw move. Just once, the smallest adjustment. And she thought, he is angry on my brother's behalf. Not strategically angry, actually angry. The way you are angry when something that did not deserve to happen has happened to someone who did not deserve it. She filed that away in the drawer where she was keeping all the things about Raphael DeLuca that did not fit the shape of the man she had signed a contract with. The drawer was getting full. They arrived back at the safe house at 4 in the morning. The tech team had already extracted 12 days of contact logs from Danny's burner phone and were triangulating the most frequent contact points. Caruso put the information on the table in the command room, and Raphael stood over it and began working through it with two of his men, voices low, and Delilah stood at the edge of the table and watched. At 4:40, she said, "The message said alone." Raphael looked up. "It said I come alone, which means they're expecting me to come, which means they already know I'm going to choose Marcus over the arrangement." She paused. "They think I'm predictable." "You are predictable," Raphael said, "where your brother is concerned." "Yes, which is what makes it useful." She looked at the map on the table. "If they're expecting me to come alone, and I do come, but not alone, they won't be looking the right direction." Silence in the room. "You're talking about using yourself as bait," Raphael said. "I'm talking about giving Moretti what he expects so he stops looking for what he doesn't expect." She held his gaze. "I go. You follow. He thinks he has me and the ledger. He doesn't." "If anything goes wrong, things have already gone wrong," she said. "My brother is in a concrete room with zip ties and a bare bulb, and I have 48 hours. I'm not waiting here doing calculations while the clock runs." Raphael looked at her for a very long time. The command room was quiet around them, the two other men studiously interested in the map. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it exactly as I plan it. Every detail, every timing, no improvisation." "Agreed." "If at any point the situation changes and I tell you to stop, I stop," she said. "Raphael, yes. Tell me what the plan is." He held her gaze one more moment. Something in his face was doing the thing it sometimes did. The thing where the control got very thin, and she could see something moving underneath it, warm and specific, and directed entirely at her. Then he looked down at the map and began to talk. She leaned in beside him, close enough that their arms were nearly touching, and she looked at the map and listened. And it occurred to her at the back of everything, beneath the fear and the anger and the 48-hour clock, that she was standing in a room at 4 in the morning in a city that wanted both of them dead, and she was not frightened of the man beside her. She was frightened for him, which was a distinction she had not been expecting and could not afford, and that arrived anyway, the way the most inconvenient truths always do, completely and without warning, and at exactly the wrong. The plan had 7 steps, and Delilah memorized all of them by 5 in the morning. Step 1. Raphael's tech team would respond to Moretti's burner number from Danny's phone, as Danny, confirming that Delilah had received the photograph and was cooperating. Step 2. Delilah would make contact with Moretti's people directly, using the burner, stating that she needed 12 hours to access the ledger and would come alone to the exchange point they designated. Step 3. When the exchange point was confirmed, Raphael's team would spend those 12 hours mapping the location, identifying entry and exit points, positioning 4 two-man units in the surrounding perimeter. Step 4. Delilah would go in, carrying a copy of the ledger, real enough to survive brief visual inspection with enough genuine top-layer data to be convincing for approximately 90 seconds. Step 5. The moment Marcus was confirmed visually alive and mobile, Delilah would signal. Step 6. Raphael's team moved. Step 7. They came out with Marcus. "What's my signal?" she'd asked. Raphael had looked at her across the table. "You say his name," he said. "Out loud. That's it. You say Marcus and we move. Simple. Simple is what works." She'd repeated all 7 steps back to him without notes. He'd listened without correcting her. When she finished, he'd said, "The copy of the ledger." He slid a manila folder across the table. 40 pages. The top 12 are real, current enough to look active. The rest is fabricated. It will pass a glance. It will not pass a detailed review. How long does a detailed review take? Longer than we need. She'd taken the folder and held it and thought about the weight of what she was about to carry into a building full of people who had already tried to kill them once. And she'd thought about Marcus in the photograph with his head down and his wrists bound, and the weight became manageable. Not light, never light, just manageable. The exchange point came through at 9:47 in the morning. A text to Danny's burner from a number that Raphael's team had already identified as Soto's operational line. An address on the city's far southwest side, an abandoned steel processing facility off Pulaski that had been closed for 11 years and that sat on a block of industrial vacancy deep enough that sound didn't carry to anything occupied. 12 hours. Midnight. They picked well, Caruso said, looking at the aerial map. Loading docks on 3 sides. Roof access. Multiple internal levels. It's a kill box, one of Raphael's men said. His name was Tate, and he had the particular calm of someone who has walked into kill boxes before and walked out of most of them. They're not planning an exchange. They're planning a cleanup. I know, Raphael said. He looked at Delilah when he said it. She looked back at him. I know, she said. You don't have to. I know what it is, she said. I'm still going. We're still doing this. What changes in the plan? Raphael turned back to the map, and the 12 hours began. He worked the entire day without stopping. She watched him from across the command room in pieces. The precise way he moved between maps and monitors and men, the economy of his directions, the way decisions that would take most people 20 minutes to reach seemed to arrive in him already formed and ready to execute. He didn't eat. He drank coffee standing up and set the mug down half-finished and forgot about it. By 3 in the afternoon, he had 6 men repositioned around the southwest perimeter of the facility, 2 more on rooftops 2 blocks north with long-range capability, and a 4-vehicle convoy staged half a mile from the site. At 4, he came and sat across from her at the kitchen table of the safe house. He put his hands flat on the table and looked at her. Talk to me, she said. The facility has 3 confirmed interior guard positions based on satellite thermal, he said. Moretti's people moved in sometime yesterday. We count at least 9 bodies inside, possibly more. And Marcus? 1 thermal signature that's stationary in what looks like a sub-level room, east side of the building. He paused. He's warm. He's alive. She breathed. Getting to him means crossing the main floor, Raphael said, which is where the guards are, which is where Moretti will have you brought first, before the exchange. The moment you go below ground level, you lose contact with my team. How long do I have before that becomes a problem? 2 minutes. If we're moving at the signal, 2 minutes is manageable. If anything delays the signal, I don't delay, she said. Delilah. He said her name with a weight she hadn't heard him use before. If something goes wrong inside and you can't signal, if they take the phone, if they move you to a location my team can't immediately reach, you don't wait for us. You find any exit and you go. Marcus or no Marcus? She looked at him. I mean it, he said. If I do that, Marcus. My team gets Marcus, he said. The moment we're inside, 2 men go straight for the sublevel, regardless of what's happening with you. You have my word. His word. She sat with that for a moment. The strange, specific weight of a promise made by a man who ran organized crime on a handshake, and whose loyalty, she was increasingly certain, was as real and as absolute as anything she'd ever been offered. Okay, she said. Okay, he said, and then quieter. After this is over, she said. He stopped. She stopped. The sentence had nowhere clean to go right now, and they both knew it and sat with the unfinished shape of it across the table from each other. Then he stood up and said, We leave at 10:30, and went back to the monitors, and she watched him go and pressed her hands flat on the table where his hands had been and felt the faint warmth the wood had held. She changed at 9. Someone had brought clothes to the safe house. Dark jeans, a black jacket, flat boots she could run in. She put her hair back hard and looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror and thought, this is what the next several hours look like. This face. This decision. Own it. She owned it. Raphael was waiting in the front room when she came out. He looked at her the way he had looked at her at the door of the penthouse before the gala, assessing, quick, and then something that landed after the assessment and was different from it. He was in dark clothes too, and he had a weapon holstered at his hip that he wasn't concealing, which she understood meant they were past the point of concealing things. Your phone, he said. He handed her a device, not her own, a clean one, with a single contact loaded. If you need me and you can't signal, call. I'll hear it. She took it, put it in her jacket pocket. Don't let anything happen to you out there, she said. He looked at her. The thing in his face that he usually managed did not get managed this time. It sat there, present and unguarded, for exactly long enough that she felt it like a physical thing. something that moved from his expression into her chest and settled there with the particular weight of something that matters. "I'll be right behind you," he said. "I know," she said. Caruso opened the door, and the night came in cold and the city smelled like rain coming, and Delilah walked out first because that was the plan, and the plan was the thing she was holding on to. The car dropped her 2 blocks from the facility at 11:53. She walked the rest of it alone. The southwest side at midnight had its own specific silence. Not empty, because no part of Chicago is ever fully empty, but thinned out, industrial, the silence of a place that works during the day and sheds its workers at 5 and doesn't pretend otherwise after that. The facility was 3 stories of dark corrugated steel, windowless on the ground level, a chain-link fence that someone had already cut a man-sized opening in, and 2 loading docks with their bay doors rolled halfway up, orange utility light bleeding out underneath them. She went through the fence opening and kept walking. 2 men stepped out from the shadows at the loading dock before she reached it. Big, jacketed, one of them with a flashlight, he shone directly in her face before dropping it to her torso and her hands. She stopped walking and held the folder up and held her hands away from her body. "The ledger," she said. The one with the flashlight said, "Turn around." She turned around. Hands on the dock. They patted her down. Thorough, professional, not gentle. They took the clean phone from her jacket pocket. The folder they took from her hands, and one of them looked at the top page under the flashlight for approximately 6 seconds and then passed it to the other man. She thought, 90 seconds. I have 90 seconds of cover on that document. They turned her around, and one of them jerked his head toward the open bay, and she walked inside. The interior of the facility was enormous and cold and smelled like old metal and rust and something chemical underneath that she couldn't identify. The floor was poured concrete, cracked in long seismic-looking lines, and the ceiling was 3 stories up and crossed with structural steel beams that disappeared into the shadows at the top. Industrial lights, the old kind, hanging fixtures with wire cages, were strung at intervals along the central floor, creating pools of orange light with heavy darkness between them. There were men in the darkness. She could feel them before she saw them. The weight of positioned bodies, the particular stillness of people who have been told to stay where they are. She counted 4 that she could see, assumed twice that many she couldn't. She was walked through the center of the floor toward a cleared area where a single folding table had been set up under the best of the hanging lights. Behind the table stood Victor Moretti. He looked different here than he had at the gala, less polished. He'd shed the event posture, the performance of social ease. Here he was simply large and confident and inhabiting a space he controlled, and he looked at her the way people look at things they've already decided the value of. "Mrs. DeLuca," he said, like the title amused him. "Where's my brother?" she said. "In a moment." He looked at the folder in his man's hand. "Let me see it." She nodded at his man to give it to him. He took it, opened it. She watched his eyes move across the top page, and she counted internally. 1, 2, 3. Watching the quality of his attention. He turned to page 2, page 3. 8 seconds. "This is current," he said. It wasn't a question, but it had a question under it. "As of last week," she said, "I had to access the safe. He keeps it in the penthouse. You already know he's been out of the penthouse for 2 days, which is why I needed the extra time." Moretti looked at her steadily. She held his gaze and kept her face at the specific temperature of someone doing something terrible for the right reasons, which was not entirely a performance. "You understand what this means for your husband," he said. "I understand what my brother means to me," she said. Something in Moretti's face shifted. Approval, maybe, or the specific satisfaction of someone who believes they have correctly predicted human behavior. He closed the folder and handed it to the man at his right. "Bring the Rowan kit up," he said. The man moved toward a stairwell at the east end of the floor. Delilah tracked him. Sublevel, east side. She thought, Raphael has the thermal. They know where he is. The moment I signal, 2 men go straight down. Moretti came around the table and stood closer to her than the table had allowed. He was 4 inches taller than her, and he used the height the way large men sometimes do. Not aggressively, just as a fact of the space that he let do its own work. "Your husband is a careful man," he said. "Very careful. He thought he could stabilize his position by importing a civilian, make himself look settled. He tilted his head. Instead, he gave me a way in. I'm standing here, she said. That looks like your way worked. It did, he said. You're very cooperative, Mrs. DeLuca. Much more than I expected from someone married to Raphael DeLuca for, what is it now? Less than a week. 8 days, she said. 8 days. He smiled. And you're here without him. That tells me something. It tells you I love my brother, she said. It tells me, Moretti said, that when I need leverage against Raphael DeLuca, I know exactly which pressure point to use. He paused. I want you to give him a message when you leave tonight. Tell him the ledger is the opening offer. Tell him the Southside Network and the port channels are the actual terms. Tell him the High Council meeting is in 40 hours, and I will be at that table with this documentation, and he will not have a position left to defend unless he agrees to a formal transfer of the Eastern port contracts by midnight tomorrow. She looked at him. That's not a message, she said. That's a surrender demand. Yes, Moretti said pleasantly. It is. The stairwell door banged open. Marcus came through it. He was walking. She registered that first, with a physical relief that moved through her so fast it was almost dizzying, walking under his own power, though there was dried blood at his hairline, and he was pale in the way people get pale when they've been in a concrete room without proper light for 3 weeks. And his hands were free now, though. There were marks on his wrists from the zip ties, and he was looking around the industrial floor with the dazed blinking of someone whose eyes were adjusting and whose brain was still running an emergency calibration. Then he saw her. D, he said. His voice broke on the single syllable. Marcus, she said. The word came out of her clear and full volume, and the moment it left her mouth, she felt the shift in the building. Not heard it, felt it, a change in the pressure of the outside that she recognized from the penthouse hallway, the particular physics of men moving fast toward a structure. Moretti felt it too. He turned, fast for a big man, and said something sharp to the men in the shadows, and the facility came alive, bodies moving out of the dark, weapons up, and Moretti's face went from pleasant to something entirely different, something that was cold and specific and very, very fast. He turned back to Delilah. You brought him, he said. I told you I love my brother, she said. I didn't say I came alone. Moretti's hand moved. One of his men grabbed Marcus by the collar and put a gun to his head, and Marcus went rigid and the floor froze and everything in the building hung on the edge of the next second like a man on a ledge. Then the loading dock bay on the north wall blew inward. The explosion was not enormous, shaped, controlled, just enough to take the bay door off its tracks and fill the floor with smoke, and a percussion that hit Delilah in the chest like a shove. The lights in that section of the floor died. Men were shouting. Through the smoke, she could see shapes moving fast and low, 4 of them, 5, coming through the ruined bay with the controlled aggression of people who have done this specific thing before. Moretti grabbed the folder off his man's chest and moved toward the east stairwell, and 2 of his guards closed around him, and she thought, he's going up. He's going to the roof. He has an exit. Marcus was on the floor. His captor had dropped him when the bay blew, and he'd gone down and was now on his hands and knees between 2 of Moretti's scrambling men, and Delilah moved without deciding to move, 3 steps across the concrete, and grabbed her brother's arm and hauled him toward the nearest pillar and pressed him behind it and put herself between him and the floor. D? Don't talk, she said. Can you run? Yeah. When I say go, you go toward the north wall, the opening where the bay door was. You run through it and you keep running until someone grabs you, and that someone will be one of Raphael's people, and you let them take you. You understand? Where are you? Marcus. She grabbed his face with both hands. He was shaking. She probably was too. Do you understand me? Yeah, he said. Yeah, Dee. I understand. The floor was chaos. Gunfire from the south end, where 2 of Moretti's guards had taken position behind rusted machinery. Return fire from Raphael's men moving through the smoke. The sound of glass and steel and shouted commands in the dark. The orange utility lights swung on their cables from the percussion and threw moving shadows across everything. And in the strobing confusion, she could see Caruso moving along the east wall with 2 men, and she could see the stairwell door closing behind Moretti, and she could see, at the south end of the floor, Raphael. He moved through the smoke like he'd been designed for exactly this. Low, certain, weapon up, covering ground without wasted motion. He cleared a gap between two machinery banks and came up on one of Moretti's guards. From an angle the man wasn't watching, and it was over in 2 seconds, and then he was moving again and his eyes swept the floor and found her behind the pillar. The relief on his face lasted approximately 1 second. Then he was focused again, professional, moving toward her. "Go," she said to Marcus. Marcus ran. She watched him clear the distance to the north wall and disappear through the blown-out bay into the cold outside, and she breathed. Raphael reached her. He was breathing harder than usual, which for him meant his chest was moving with slightly more than its normal precision. There was a smear of something dark on his jaw that she didn't look at too long. "Moretti," she said. "East stairwell." He took the folder. "He's going up." "I know." "He has 2 men with him." "I know." He looked at her with a rapid, comprehensive sweep that she understood was him checking for damage. "You're not hurt." "No, go! He's going to the roof. Stay with Tate." He pointed. Tate was 10 feet away, positioned against the pillar's opposite face. "Do not move from this position until Tate brings you out." "Raphael." But he was already moving, east, toward the stairwell. She watched him go and felt the cold concrete of the pillar against her back, and felt her heart doing something loud and irregular in her chest, and told it firmly to stop. Tate appeared at her side without being summoned, which was the mark of someone who'd been doing this long enough to anticipate the moment. "We're good," he said. "Team 2 has your brother outside." "Thank you," she said, and meant it more than 2 words could carry. On the floor, the firefight was collapsing. Moretti's guards giving ground, pulling back. The organized resistance becoming individual flight as Raphael's team pressed in from 3 directions with the terrible efficiency of people who had planned this from every angle. 2 of Moretti's men went down. 1 ran for a side door and didn't make it. The floor was clearing, but Moretti was above them. She could hear it through the ceiling. Impact, movement, the sharp report of a gunshot that echoed down through the building's steel bones and rattled the hanging lights. Then another shot. Then nothing. The silence from the floor above was a different kind of silence than the silence before the bay door blew. It was the silence after, not before. She knew the difference. Tate's radio cracked. He listened. His expression didn't change because it was professionally not permitted to change, but she saw something in his posture. A very small easing, a millimeter of release. "What?" she said. He looked at her. "Mr. DeLuca's on the roof," he said. "And Moretti?" Tate looked at her for 1 more second. "Tate," she said. "Moretti's on the roof," he said carefully. "Mr. DeLuca has the situation under control." She looked at the ceiling. Through 3 floors of corrugated steel and rust and 11 years of abandonment, she could not see anything. But she could feel the specific gravity of what was happening above her. 2 men and a catwalk and the rest of Chicago glittering in the cold dark below, and a ledger that wasn't real, and a war that had been building for 3 years, and the specific weight of every decision that had led to this roof at this moment. She pressed her palm flat against the pillar and waited, and the silence from above went on, and she thought, "Come back down. Raphael, come back." The door at the top of the east stairwell was still swinging when Delilah heard the second gunshot. She moved before Tate could stop her, not running because the floor was still uncertain, debris and smoke and the aftermath of men who had been shooting at each other 30 seconds ago, but moving, crossing the floor with a speed that Tate had to match. And he did, because he was professional enough to know that stopping her was going to cost more time than accompanying her. The stairwell was dark and smelled like rust and old concrete and something burnt from the altercation that had come through here minutes before. She took the stairs fast, 1 hand on the railing, Tate behind her and his weapon up covering the angles she wasn't watching. And on the second-level landing, she stepped over a man she didn't look at directly and kept climbing. The roof access door was open. Cold air hit her when she came through it. March and lake wind and the smell of the city. That specific Chicago smell of water and steel and something always burning somewhere. The roof was flat and wide and covered in gravel and the detritus of 11 years of abandonment, pooled water, a collapsed ventilation housing, cable brackets rusted to orange, a water tower in the northeast corner that listed slightly and had given up any pretense of function. There was a catwalk running along the building's west edge, old maintenance access, the kind of thing that had been rated for 200 pounds in 1987 and had not been inspected since. It crossed the building's full width and ended at a rusted ladder that went nowhere useful anymore. Victor Moretti was on the catwalk. He was not standing. He was down on one knee, his left hand gripping the railing with both the desperation and the deliberateness of a man who has been hit and has not yet decided whether to acknowledge it. His right hand was at his side, and the gun that had been in his right hand was on the gravel 10 feet behind him, which meant someone had put him down and taken it from him in the sequence of events Delilah had not seen. Raphael was standing at the near end of the catwalk. He had his weapon at his side, not raised. He was looking at Moretti with the expression she now recognized as his coldest one. Not rage, not satisfaction, just the complete measured attention of a man in the process of making a final calculation. Two of Moretti's guards were on the gravel at the base of the catwalk. She didn't look at them long. She looked at Raphael. He was standing with his weight forward on his left foot and his right arm slightly out from his body, and she knew enough by now to read that posture. He'd been hit on the right side. Not critically. He was standing, he was breathing with controlled evenness, his weapon hand was steady, but hit. Something was wrong on his right side that he was managing by not acknowledging. "Raphael," she said. He turned his head. Saw her. Something moved across his face. The same brief, unguarded thing she'd seen in the safe house kitchen and in the car and across every folding table they'd shared in the last 48 hours. And then it was managed again, set aside, because Moretti was still on the catwalk and the night was not finished. "I told you to stay with Tate," he said. "Tate's right here," she said. "How bad is it?" "It's fine." "Raphael?" "It's fine." His voice was even. "Go back to the door." "I'm not going back to the door." He looked at her for one more second, and then he looked back at Moretti, and she understood from the angle of his shoulders that this was where they were, all three of them, on this roof, and the next several minutes were going to determine what came after. But Moretti got to his feet. He did it slowly, with the specific deliberateness of a man who refuses to be seen struggling even when he is struggling. And when he was upright, he put both hands on the catwalk railing and looked at Raphael with the remnants of the authority he'd walked in with, which was diminished but not entirely gone. Because men like Victor Moretti do not give up the performance of power until the moment they physically cannot maintain it. "You came yourself," Moretti said. His voice was level but slightly compressed, something in his chest making full breath difficult. "I expected Caruso. Maybe Tate." "You threatened my wife," Raphael said. "I come for things that matter." Moretti's eyes moved to Delilah briefly. "Sentimental," he said. "I didn't expect that from you either. Your father wasn't sentimental." "My father trusted the wrong person," Raphael said. "I didn't." Moretti looked at him for a long moment. The wind off the lake moved between them, cold and indifferent, the city glittering in every direction below the building's edge. "The High Council," Moretti said. "The meeting is in 38 hours. "I know. You walk in there without me." "I walk in there without you," Raphael said. Having resolved the source of the territorial dispute and secured the stability of the eastern port channels, the Council will hear a complete accounting of the last 6 weeks, including the documentation of your attack on a civilian and her family, including the federal intercept at the port facility, which I have now confirmed was your operation, not mine, and which I have evidence you attempted to frame as mine. He paused. "The meeting will go fine." Moretti absorbed this. She could see him doing it, reorganizing the board, looking for the play that was still available to him, the angle that changed the math. "You've been building that case," Moretti said slowly. "For 8 weeks," Raphael said, "since the intercept. While you thought I was scrambling." The faintest inflection. Not satisfaction exactly. More like the clean completion of a long-held breath. "Yes." Moretti was quiet. The wind moved. Below them, Chicago was exactly what it always was. Enormous and lit and entirely unconcerned with the specific human weight being resolved on this particular rooftop. "I have money," Moretti said. "Accounts you don't know about. Liquid assets. I can..." No, Raphael said. Territory. The South Channel's outright. Walk away and I give you some... No. Raphael. Moretti's voice dropped. Lost the last performance layer. What was underneath was something raw. Not fear, not quite, but the specific gravity of a man who has run out of positions and knows it. We've been in this city for 20 years, both of us. There's a version of this where we both... You put a gun to my wife's brother's head, Raphael said. The quiet of his voice made it worse than volume would have. You put a sniper on my building while she was inside it. You used someone she trusted and turned him against her. There is no version. Moretti looked at him, then he looked at Delilah. She met his gaze. She didn't give him anything. He looked back at Raphael and something in him settled. The final stillness of a man who has reached the end of his options and has, somewhere under everything, known this was coming long enough to have made a kind of peace with the shape of it. Make it clean, Moretti said. It'll be clean, Raphael said. He raised his weapon. Delilah looked at the water tower in the northeast corner and the city beyond it and the lake in the far distance, black and enormous and permanent. And she listened to the single shot that crossed the roof and sent a flock of pigeons scattering from the ventilation housing into the cold, dark sky. Then silence. Then Raphael's footsteps on the gravel, crossing back from the catwalk. She turned around. He stopped 3 feet from her. He was breathing with the controlled evenness she recognized as effort rather than ease, and up close she could see the dampness on the right side of his dark jacket that confirmed what the posture had already told her. His face was exactly what it always was. His eyes, looking at her, were something else. It's done, he said. I know, she said. Your brother is outside. Tate confirmed. I know, she said again, and then, show me. He frowned. Your side, she said. Show me how bad it is. Delilah, we are standing on a roof in the middle of the night and you have been shot, and I am asking you to show me how bad it is, she said. Please. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who is not accustomed to being asked to show anything, and then he pulled the right side of his jacket open. It was a graze, long, deep enough to bleed seriously, not deep enough to have done structural damage. The dark fabric of his shirt was soaked on that side, and the wound itself was raw and ugly but clean-edged, and she looked at it and looked back at his face and said, We need to get that closed. I know. Now. Not in an hour. Now. Yes, he said. She reached out and took the edge of his jacket and pulled it closed over the wound, and her fingers were against the fabric over his ribs, and she could feel his breath moving under her hand, steady and real, and she kept her hand there for 1 moment longer than she needed to for the purpose of closing the jacket. He looked down at her hand, then at her face. Let's go down, she said. Yes, he said quietly. Let's go down. Bassa. Marcus was in the back of one of the armored SUVs wrapped in a thermal blanket that someone had produced from somewhere and holding a bottle of water with both hands like it might disappear. When the door opened and Delilah climbed in beside him, he made a sound that wasn't a word. Just a sound, raw and relieved and young, and he put his arms around her and held on, and she held back. And she pressed her face against his shoulder and let herself feel it for exactly as long as the night would allow. I'm okay, he kept saying. Dee, I'm okay. I know, she said. I know you are. They weren't. He pulled back and looked at her, his face pale and marked and exhausted and hers. They just kept me in a room. It wasn't... Marcus. She put her hand on the side of his face. We have time. You can tell me everything. We have time now. He nodded, swallowed, looked out the window at the facility they'd just come from, at the men moving in and out of the blown bay door, at the organized aftermath of a night that had reorganized several lives in ways that couldn't be reversed. The guy, he said. Raphael, he got you out, she said. Yeah. Marcus looked at her. Dee, I saw his face when they brought me up from downstairs, before everything started. He was already in the building. I know. He came in before you. I know, Marcus. Her brother looked at her with the specific look of a 21-year-old who has just understood something about his sister that he hadn't known before. Oh, he said. Don't, she said. I'm not saying anything. Good. He was quiet for a moment, then, Danny? Not tonight, she said. We'll deal with Danny. Not tonight. Marcus nodded slowly. He leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes, and she watched his face and thought about the photograph. The concrete room, the bare bulb, his head down. And she let herself feel the full weight of the last 3 weeks in one long exhale that she kept quiet enough that he wouldn't hear it. Then she looked out the window and found Raphael standing 20 feet away, speaking to Caruso, one hand pressed to his right side in a way that looked casual but was covering the wound. And she watched him and felt the specific thing she'd been carefully not naming settle into its permanent shape inside her chest. She named it now. There was no longer any point in not naming it. A doctor came to the second safe house at 2:30 in the morning. He was 60, quiet, and had clearly been on Raphael's private retainer long enough that the circumstances of the house call registered on his face as routine. He cleaned and closed the wound in the kitchen while Raphael sat on the counter without being asked to and answered his phone twice and looked at something on his tablet once. And the doctor told him he'd lost enough blood that he needed to rest. Actually rest. Horizontal, nothing in his hands, for at least 6 hours. Raphael said, "I understand," in the tone of a man who understands something and intends to do something else. The doctor looked at Delilah. She said, "I'll handle it." The doctor said, "Good," and packed his bag and left. Marcus had been put in a room down the hall, clean clothes, food, a real bed, and she'd checked on him at 2 and found him already asleep with the thermal blanket still around his shoulders and his mouth slightly open, which was exactly how he'd slept as a kid, and which meant, she understood, that he was truly safe enough that his body had accepted it. She found Raphael in the command room at 3 in the morning, standing at the table, not looking at anything in particular. The tablet was face down. His phone was in his pocket. He was just standing there in the low light with his hands resting on the edge of the table and his head slightly forward, and she understood that this was what Raphael DeLuca looked like when no one was watching. Not reduced, not diminished, just tired. Just a man at the end of a long and costly night, standing in a room, feeling the weight of it without performing anything. She came in and stood across the table from him. He looked up. "Sit down," she said. You lost enough blood that Dr. Hallman came at 2:30 in the morning," she said. "Sit down." He sat down. She sat across from him. The table between them was bare and the room was quiet, and the city outside was doing what it always did, indifferent and enormous. "The High Council meeting," he said. 36 hours, she said. "You'll be ready. We'll prepare in the morning." "The documentation on Moretti, Caruso has it. You told him before we left the facility. I heard you." She put her hands flat on the table. "It's handled, Raphael. For the next 6 hours, it is handled." He looked at his hands, then at hers, then at her face. "Your brother," he said. "Sleeping," she said. "He's okay. He's going to need time, but he's okay." "He'll have protection," Raphael said, "for as long as he needs it. Whatever he needs to." "I know," she said. "Thank you." He was quiet. The word "thank you" seemed to land on him differently than most things did, softer and more complicated. "You didn't have to come to the roof," he said. "I needed to see that you were standing," she said. "I was always going to be standing." "I didn't know that," she said. "I'm not able to know that about you yet. We've known each other for 8 days, and 5 of them have been a crisis. So," she paused. "I needed to see it." He looked at her for a long time. The lamp on the table threw light across the lower half of his face and left the rest in shadow. And she thought about the gala, the chandelier light, the 3 seconds at the end of the elevator ride, and every managed expression and every unguarded moment in between, all of it laid out now like a map of a country she'd been crossing without knowing its name. "The contract," he said. "What about it?" "You fulfilled the primary obligation," he said. "The public establishment of the marriage, the council stabilization, tonight resolves the threat that made the arrangement necessary. Technically." "Raphael," she said. He stopped. "Are you trying to release me from the contract?" she said. "I'm telling you that you've earned the right to know that the obligations. Are you doing that because you think I want to go?" she said. "Or because you're frightened that I might want to stay?" The silence that followed was the longest one they'd had. Longer than the elevator. Longer than the hallway. It had more inside it than those silences had because those were early silences, cautious ones, And this one came after 8 days and a sniper's bullet and a safe house and a brother in a concrete room and a rooftop and a man standing at a table at 3 in the morning, not quite willing to ask the question. Both, he said. The word came out without calculation. She could hear the difference. From him, the absence of management was audible. Just a word, just the truth of it. Okay, she said. Then I'll tell you what I know. I know that I walked into a diner on a Thursday night and signed a document I read standing up because I wasn't going to sit down for a man I didn't trust yet. I know that I have trusted approximately 4 people in my adult life, and 2 of them are in this building right now, and one of them sold me to the wrong side. I know that you have had 4 separate opportunities to be less honest with me than you were, and you chose honesty every time, including the time it made you look like exactly what you are. She paused. I know that you came to my room first, in the penthouse, when the window broke. Liability I couldn't afford to lose, he said. Quiet. The same words from the safe house kitchen. Is that what it was? She said. He held her gaze. No, he said. I know, she said. He breathed. She watched his chest move. Careful, controlled, still managing the wound whether he meant to or not, the body doing its own accounting regardless of what the mind decided. She reached across the table, put her hand over his. He looked at it. He turned his hand under hers and held it. Not tightly, just held it, the way you hold something you've been carrying for a long time and have finally set down. I don't know how to do this, he said. And this was perhaps the most extraordinary thing she'd heard him say, including everything about territory and ledgers and council politics, because it was the one thing he said without any architecture around it. Just the plain, undefended truth of a man who runs everything and is lost in the specific small geography of this. Neither do I, she said. That's fine. We'll figure it out. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, she said. But I'm not interested in simple. I'm interested in real. She looked at him. Are you? He looked at her hand in his. He looked at her face. Yes, he said. Not. The High Council meeting took place 2 days later in a private dining room in a hotel that had been facilitating exactly these kinds of meetings for 40 years and whose discretion was encoded in its ownership structure. 5 men, a long table, water and coffee that no one drank, and Rafael De Luca presenting his case for territorial stability with the same precision he brought to everything he did, and Delilah beside him because she was his wife and the wife of the De Luca had attended these things now, which was a new protocol established by the fact of her existence. She sat through 3 hours of it and said 4 words total. 2 were her own name, when she was introduced, and 2 were thank you at the end, when Councilman Brower shook her hand, and she paid attention to all of it, cataloging everything, because she had learned in 8 days and several lifetimes that information was the one currency that never ran out. The vote was 4-1 in Raphael's favor. The dissenting vote was from a man named Castellan, who was 71 years old and who had been allied with Moretti for reasons that predated the current arrangement and that would now require their own careful management, which Raphael had already begun thinking through before they left the building. In the car, she said, Castellan. Yes, he said. He's going to be a problem. Not immediately. But, he agreed. Eventually. He looked at her. I know. You'll need a different approach than Moretti, she said. He's old enough to respond better to negotiation than pressure. I know that too. I'm just saying. I know you are. And there was something in his voice that was new. Not warm exactly. Warmth was too soft a word for anything Rafael De Luca produced, but close to it, the temperature immediately adjacent to warmth, which on him was more than most people managed. She looked out the window at the city, early spring light on the lake. The water was the color of hammered steel under cloud cover, and it was beautiful in the specific way that hard things are sometimes beautiful. My brother needs a job, she said. I know. Not in your organization, she said. I mean a real job, something with regular hours and a paycheck that doesn't come from anyone who needs a favor. I have 3 legitimate companies, he said. The shipping company has an operations analyst position open. Entry level, but the work is real and the salary is, don't make it a favor, she said. Make it a real application. Let him earn it. He looked at her. You want me to make your brother compete for a job at my company. I want my brother to know he got there on his own, she said. Yes, he might not get it.
Then he looks somewhere else, she said. But he should have the shot. Raphael was quiet for a moment. Right, he said. Thank you. Stop thanking me. When you stop doing things worth thanking you for, she said. He almost smiled. She caught the edge of it before he managed it away and stored it carefully.
The penthouse was returned to them 6 days after the shooting. The window had been replaced. The entire section of glass along the north face, floor to ceiling, new and clean, and with a reinforcement in the framing that had not been there before. The hallway where the mirror had shattered had been replastered and repainted. The floors had been cleaned and resealed. Standing in the foyer again, Delilah felt the strangeness of return. The way a place holds the shape of what happened in it, even after the physical evidence has been cleaned away. The walls knowing things even after the surfaces have been made new. Helena was there, composed, efficient, briefing Raphael on the week's schedule before he'd taken his coat off. Delilah moved through the space while they talked. Kitchen, living room, the long windows overlooking the lake. The water was calmer today, still cold, but calmer. She stood at the window for a long time. She heard Raphael finish with Helena, heard Helena's heels crossing the marble toward the elevator, heard the elevator doors close. Then quiet. Then Raphael behind her, not close, 6, 7 feet back, standing in the room, looking at her, looking at the lake. Helena says there's a gallery opening Thursday, he said. The Hartley Foundation spring show. She thinks we should attend. Do you want to attend? No, he said, but it's useful. Then we attend, she said. She could hear him moving, the faint shift of his weight on the floor, and then he was beside her at the window. Not touching, just beside, looking at the same lake she was looking at. You could go back to school, Shane, he said. She turned to look at him. The business program at UIC, he said. Or somewhere else if you want. You'd qualify for Raphael, she said. The arrangement doesn't require you to... I know what the arrangement requires, she said. We have 11 months and 3 weeks left on the contract. Is that what you're referencing? He said nothing. She looked at him. The afternoon light from the lake was in his face, and he was looking at the water with an expression she could now read fully. Not calm, not the managed version, but the actual man underneath it, who was 32 years old and had been running a machine since he was 26, and who had lost his father to misplaced trust, and who had stood on a roof in March with a bullet wound and not once let it show, and who had turned his hand over on a table at 3 a.m. and held on. I don't want to go back, she said. He looked at her. Not because I don't want the degree, she said. I do, and I'll get it, but I don't want to go back to what I was before this. I don't want to go back to being the person who was easy to overlook. She paused. I'm not that person anymore. I don't think I want to be. What do you want to be? He asked. She looked at the lake. Someone who earns things, she said. Same as always, but with different tools. He was quiet. And the contract, he said. What about it? 11 months. Is that what you want? She said. The contract to be the thing? 11 months and the terms and $5 million, and then you don't contact me and I go wherever I go? He said nothing for long enough that she turned to look at him directly. His jaw was set. His eyes were on the water. She could see the effort of the control he was holding, the specific effort of a man who has trained himself to give nothing away and is finding that the person beside him has somehow learned to read what he holds anyway. No, he said, very quietly. Then don't use the contract to manage the distance, she said, because I'm done with distance as a management strategy. I've been using it for 5 years and it doesn't work and I'm done with it. He turned from the window and looked at her fully. She held it. She was good at holding things now, had been building the skill across 8 of the strangest days of her life, in safe houses and command rooms and on a roof at midnight, and she held his gaze now with everything she'd built. This is not the life you planned, he said. No, she agreed. It's larger. Something gave way in his face. Not dramatically, not a collapse, nothing so theatrical. Just a small final release, like a held door easing shut, like a fist opening. He reached out and his hand came to the side of her face, slow, deliberate, giving her the full time to step back if that was what she wanted. She didn't step back. His thumb moved once across her cheekbone. He looked at her like someone seen something they'd been trying not to see for long enough that seeing it was almost a relief. "Delilah," he said, just her name. "I know," she said. He kissed her the way he did everything, with complete specific intention and without apology. And once he started, he did not stop until the thing was fully done, and she kissed him back the same way because she had learned it from him or because she'd always had it and just hadn't had anywhere to put it. The lake moved outside the window. The city held them without comment. Light crossed the floor in long, pale bars and moved with the afternoon. 3 weeks later, he burned the contract. Not ceremonially. Not at a fireplace with a specific dramatic gesture. He was standing in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning in the middle of making coffee, and he pulled it from somewhere. She hadn't known he still had it. And he looked at it for a moment, and then he folded it twice and held it over the gas range and let the flame take it. He dropped the last corner in the kitchen sink when it got close to his fingers and ran water over the ash, and that was that. She was sitting at the counter watching. He turned around and looked at her with an expression she'd cataloged carefully over 3 weeks of accumulating evidence. This specific expression, the one he wore when he'd just done something that mattered and was pretending it was unremarkable. "Coffee?" he said. "Please," she said. He turned back to the machine. She looked at the dark smear in the sink where the last of the contract was dissolving under running water, and she thought about the diner, the cold counter, the pen he'd placed down without ceremony, and her own name written in her own handwriting at the bottom of something she'd signed because she had nothing left to lose. She thought about that woman and she felt for her. The exhaustion of her, the thinness of her reserves, the particular courage of someone making the only move available on an almost empty board. She thought, I would tell her it works out. She thought, I would tell her it costs something. It costs a lot of things. She thought, I would tell her the cost is worth it. Which is not the same thing as saying it was easy, and in fact, the fact that it wasn't easy might be the whole point. Hard things are real in a way that easy things are never quite able to be. Raphael set a coffee mug in front of her, sat down across the counter. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago always did. Enormous and lit and complicated and continuing. The lake doing its slow, cold work against the shore. The city built on layers of decisions that could not be unmade. People moving through it at all hours, carrying the specific weight of their specific lives. She had $11 in her account the night she signed the contract. She'd had almost nothing left to lose, which was, she understood now, with the particular clarity of the other side, a kind of freedom if you knew how to use it. She looked at Raphael across the counter. He was reading something on his phone with the focused attention he brought to everything, coffee in his left hand. And he glanced up briefly and caught her looking and said nothing, just held her gaze for 1 second before looking back at his phone, and the single second of it held more than most conversations she'd had in her life. She drank her coffee. The lake was visible from where she sat, just the edge of it, between buildings, the winter gray water under a sky that was finally, slowly, thinking about spring. She had paid for this view with everything she had. She decided that was exactly the right price.